Welcome back to our second session on DetNet. Our first speaker up just walked in the room, so it's perfect timing. I'm Lou Berger. This is Yanis Farkas, my co-chair. We have Ethan Grossman still remote. For the as is the case for all IETF sessions, our work here is covered by our contribution guidelines. That is summarized in the note well. If you're unfamiliar with it, please visit the URL on the bottom of the page. Basically, everything you say here becomes part of our permanent record. And in fact, we are recording with video as well as transmitting. We have collaborative note taking place on Etherpad. Please feel free to join in. Make sure your comments, your name is appropriately captured. And I'll do my best to relay comments made by Jabber. With that, we're going to jump into the agenda. First up is Greg Mirsky.
And we have a separate new blue. We have new blue sheets for the second session. So please sign. We will circulate in a minute.
Okay, thank you. IP first? Okay, IP first.
You want MPLS first?
Yeah, MPLS has some substance. Historically, it's first. Thank you. Okay, we were presenting and discussing document and then based on how work on DetNet data plane is ongoing, was suggested to split this document in specifically for the MPLS data plane case and for the IP. So this is presentation on MPLS data plane, deterministic networks with plane and OAM. So we had comments from Pascal, we addressed them and discussed, and we took their DetNet OAM document, we split it in two. And because of changes in or how the MPLS data plane document progresses, we removed the optional use of GAL-GASH. So it uses only pseudowire VCCV. So the control word, the sequence number, and it ensures that packet replication, duplicate elimination, and order preservation functions work. What we are proposing in this document is to take control word ACH from pseudowire and use the reserved field for the sequence number. So we're defining DetNet associated channel header, which the first nibble is 1. Then the version, the current version is 0. And the sequence number is a field that would be monotonically incremented. And the channel type we use from IANA pseudowire associated channel code points. The sequence number is needed so that DetNet OAM can experience the same treatment by packet replication, elimination, and order preservation function. And you can see that basically with this sequence number, if we have packet replication in EN1 and R4, then the packet that has the prime signs, so then they go and elimination in R2 will choose, for example, the original packet, and O prime will be dropped. And then the packet elimination function in EN2 will probably choose copy with 2 primes. That's because DetNet OAM will have the sequence number, so these packets can be compared and acted. Functions will work on them as they work on just DetNet flow. So what's the next steps? Because there are documents that consider of how MPLS works over or with IP UDP tunnel and with the TSN domain, we'll continue this work to address what specifics can be for these scenarios. We welcome your comments, suggestions, and questions always, and we're grateful for them. And we would like to ask for consideration to consider working group adoption of this document.
Comments? Oh, that's really funny. I was looking to Stuart and then looking for Andy in the room. Of course, Andy's not in the room. And I looked down and yes, he's at the mic queue. So I will read his question. Question for Greg. This is from Andy Malice. The draft needs to specify if the sequence number goes through 0 or not. For example, 255.01, 255.1. This is currently not specified. So a technical comment.
Right. Yes. The sequence number may wrap, but my understanding is that for packet replication and elimination functions, that is not critical.
But the MPLS data plane document is very specific on what happens, and perhaps the OAM should follow.
Okay. Okay. Then I will need to read because I missed that part.
Okay, great. Thank you. Comments? Any other comments from the floor? Do people think this document is headed in the right direction? Not getting a lot of responses. How many people have read this document? It's a pretty small number. I was assuming the answer to the next question, which I usually ask, so maybe I should have started there. How many think we should be working on OAM for MPLS DetNet data plane? It's not a huge number, but it's a reasonable number. I actually had made the assumption that this was something that the working group would want to work on, but I should have asked. My apologies. So the next question was how many read. We already saw that. There's very few. I don't think we can do much right now with the amount of people that we've had read the document. So really like to ask people to read the document, comment on the list, think of it, talk about whether you think it's headed in the right direction or the wrong direction. That'd be really useful.
Stuart, to make progress before the next meeting, maybe we should schedule it for a sort of an interim of some sort, just to do a proper review.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. The other thing, and I haven't talked to Janos about it, so we got to synchronize on this point. You know, one of the things I was thinking is we could do an adoption poll with an understanding that if it fails, it's not that it's dead. So normally when we do an adoption poll, if it's rejected, that topic is closed and we don't revisit it. We could do an adoption poll which has with an understanding that it's really about, is this headed in the right direction, and then we can come back and do it again. We can do both of those. Yeah. So we'll talk offline. You know, I think there is general agreement that this is something the working group wants to work on. It's just it's just whether or not there's any support for your specific solution.
Okay.
Okay. And again, from the Jabber, Andy has both read the document and think we should be working on it. I think that means the topic.
Thank you. Okay, can we switch to
Sure.
IP?
So now we're moving on to IP.
Okay, so this is IP portion. And after reading some the drafts that discuss DetNet over IP and relationship of IP UDP with the MPLS and TSN. So we decided that for now it's an informational document, because since packet replication and elimination functions are not envisioned in IP, in DetNet over IP, then we believe that all known IP OAM should work, and that's probably period. So for now, we are moving as informational document. The concern or the question that we would like the working group to discuss, and we will need to reflect it here, is that the definition of DetNet flow in IP identified by 6-tuple. IP OAM protocols use different well-known destination ports. Associating IP OAM with a particular DetNet flow and ensuring that they are co-routed, so traverse the same nodes and links in IP network, not in the tunnels, in IP networks, may be a problem. So we might need to have some wording, might be in this document or in a data plane document. Actually, if we make it in the data plane document, this document might be not needed. But we'll need to really explain how that can work so that OAM is fate sharing with the flow it monitors. I'm holding the dramatic pause because I see David is...
It sounds like an accurate problem description.
David's
do you have another
reaction was-
slide talking about solutions?
Well, that's what I have. Basically, we can only say that IP OAM has to be mapped with the DetNet flow. It might be just some management tools that you have to say that this flow and this flow will have to go on this route. Frankly, if there is not much, if there is an ECMP IP network, and if DetNet allows to be or may work in an ECMP environment in IP network, then it might become a more problem.
So David Black, David's reaction was, ouch, Greg is completely correct.
So on the co-routed or congruent routing stuff, we had in the flow information model, we come so far to the two directions to becoming congruent, but and introducing parameters for that, like flow ID, management parameters like flow ID and so on. We may consider extending it to the IP and maybe give a different name or something to make it sure or use those that the OAM flow goes along the same way as.
Well, it's more than just the same way. David Black, in concrete example. Suppose that the DetNet forwarding plane is fouled up at a node, but the IP forwarding plane is not. The OAM traffic, BFD, sorry, not BFD, traceroute in particular, has got to go through the DetNet forwarding plane to tell you where the broken node is, because you send it through the IP forwarding plane, will incorrectly tell you that everything's okay.
David, I thought you were also going to make the point that you also have to get into the right queues, because there's a whole queuing behavior property.
That's part of forwarding plane.
Yeah, that's
absolutely part of forwarding plane. So in queue speak, if the DetNet queue is broken in a node and the corresponding queue for that pair of IP addresses is functioning, and you send traceroute in a fashion that doesn't get into the DetNet queue, traceroute will fail to find the problem.
Yeah, I think those. This is Norm Finn. It's not trivial to get the OAM to follow the IP. I understand.
I
that.
agree.
And it's not trivial to get it treated with the same QoS. Make sure it goes in the same queues and so on.
Well,
but-
actually, that's again, if the flow is identified by 6 tuple and that controls to which
Yeah.
queue it goes.
Sure.
Yes, I understand, but that's otherwise.
Well,
If we cannot make it happen, then OAM doesn't serve its purpose.
Right, of course. So, and in theory, we should be able to say this OAM, we have to be able to look at the OAM and tell which flow the OAM is for. Okay. So there's an OAM flow per DetNet flow, right?
At some point, yes, it can be the case.
Right. So there's an OAM flow per DetNet flow. So we have to be able to look at the OAM packet and say, that goes with this DetNet flow and this and so it gets this DetNet flow service and so on. And the other part of that is that we have to allow for the bandwidth of the OAM in the reservation for the flow, which means we have to be very, very sure that the OAM is limited in bandwidth and, conforms to whatever rules we have for the flow itself. Something to think about is that with the packet replication, for example, you can argue that the sequence number allows the data flow itself to be the OAM. Now, you don't get all the functions, okay, but you certainly get connectivity. And if you have 2 paths, and I'm receiving it on one path and I'm not receiving it on the other path, I know something's wrong, and it's not just that the source stopped. So I'll just,
No,
I understand, this is just IP. Sorry. That's only if you
Right.
have the 2 paths.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Right. Again, I think it's a very good thought and suggestion to use what's called hybrid OAM methods. So using the
Okay,
right
good.
traffic. There are some advantages, but in my experience, it's a good complementary tool. It does not substitute for active OAM where the packets are specifically constructed for the test purposes, and there are many cases. For now, IP does, or at least appears to have, some issues that we need to discuss and define, and faith sharing is important. So also because there are a number of documents that explain how DetNet IP works over MPLS and or with TCN. So what we point out is that there are 2 scenarios to work in regard to OAM. So first, it's if it's a tunneling, and second one, it's a peering, if it's an interworking. So we might have just look at TSN or MPLS, DetNet MPLS domains as one hop, or we might need to interwork to provide end-to-end OAM for DetNet.
So there is another technology. I mean, I don't really see how we solve it in classical IP without some help somewhere or other, because we've never been able to solve the problem of making the paths congruent with IP. But what we could do, and what we probably need to do anyway, is to introduce an explicit routing technology, of which there are several candidates. On the one hand, there's SR. On the other hand, there's something like PPR. Or there is
It's also RSVPT, which was discussed in
RSVP.
in the T's
there-
working group, actually.
So there's actually about 4 or 5 solutions for explicit path, and we probably
There's also the PCE based one, which is one we've always talked about.
yeah. I mean, do we list them all? But anyway, there are a load of solutions, and we probably need one of those in place. Once one of those is in place to support DetNet and make it a bit more controlled, then the OAM will naturally be fate sharing.
So,
I absolutely
Stuart, we've actually been here before with MPLS, and as you may remember, we talked about using sort of companion labels that were co-routed
Yeah.
and had shared resources, and we talked about in that context that still wasn't adequate, because you might have something in your label database get corrupted. So just because you use the same forwarding identifier, you use the same resources and the same paths, because you use different traffic classification identifiers,
But
your OAM still may not succeed, which is part of the reason why we ended up with GASH and GAL. So, we've been here before. Let's not forget those lessons.
Right,
But
but-
certainly we can do some things like resource sharing and congruent paths.
Yeah, I mean, presumably you'd have to have the same all the same queuing stuff, if serve class and all those sorts of things.
No, it's worse. ICMP. ICMP is a crucial part of IP OAM. It has none of that.
So you have to set the explicit path such that the source destination pair is the trigger, not a richer set of information in the packet.
Right. If you do your DetNet traffic, I'm going to say slice selection at a DetNet node based solely on IP source address pair, then you'll pick up ICMP. Get fancier than that, and things start to get risky fast.
Right, and once you've got explicit path technology of one of the paths, and you've got IPv6 where you've got so many addresses you can throw them away in large quantity, then that's not a problem.
So I think we've hit the point where it makes sense to ask similar questions like we did for MPLS.
No,
Does the group? But go ahead.
Yeah, actually,
Well, how many more slides did you have?
no, that's one slide. No, one slide. Actually, I'm very excited that Udo decided to go to these questions, because we have not thought about it that we'll be asking for the working group adoption.
Well, we're not asking for working group adoption. What we're asking is this a problem the working group even wants to work
okay.
on? So is IP OAM for IP DetNet something the working group would like to spend energy on, spend time on? If interested, put up your hand. I would say that this is still a reasonable number. It is definitely less than in the MPLS case, which frankly, I'm surprised at. I thought it would be the same, if not more. I read the room wrong. Well, MPLS is an easier problem.
Yes.
Okay, we have a question at the mic.
So the point I would make is that
Stuart,
this
by the way.
potentially is much, much broader than just DetNet, because actually we don't have a first-class IP OAM that has these properties.
Our forwarding behavior is different than normal IP. And so we definitely have a different problem, and we also have different techniques available to us. For example, part of our architecture is that all of our IP 6-tupled flows are explicitly controlled. And so we can push some things on the control plane and place additional requirements on the control plane. That doesn't, of course, answer what we're doing in the data plane, but we have some different tools.
Sure, we have a more constrained problem, but nonetheless, this is part of a much wider problem that the IETF hasn't solved.
I think that what Stuart is saying is that what we are monitoring and what we are measuring, we don't know where it is in the network. So we're knowing that we're doing it between 2 points. We don't know which path these probes, test packets are traversing.
Norm Finn, I'm very much interested in. I'm more interested in the plain IP OAM than I am in MPLS, because I feel like the MPLS OAM is not very hard. So this is a lot more fun problem. So if somebody comes up with a plausible solution, I want to hear about it. So I'm just waiting to hear a plausible solution.
So at this point, I'd like to suggest that the folks who are interested in working on it self-organize.
Yeah.
And let's see what they can come up with. So Greg has nominated himself by writing this document
Okay.
to coordinate the activity. But let's see if we can get some critical mass of thinking on it. And just like on the Yang discussion, if you want to have the working group WebEx to have informal meetings, you can do that.
Sandbox.
The same, we'll just contact the chairs and we'll set you up. The other thing is if you would like to ask for an interim on this, we can also do that.
Mhm.
But we'd like to ask first to do the self-organizing thing and let us know how we, the chairs, can support
I
the working
appreciate it.
group.
Thank you.
And with that, you're actually out of time.
Sorry.
No, not over. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this
Control
is,
F.
now we really are in the control plane.
Control F.
Son?
Actually, in the beginning, Andy will give this presentation, but considering that he's not here, so I'm also in this work, so I will do the presentation. And here is our work about DetNet controller plan framework. Here is the background. Actually, although the DetNet control or controller plan is not in the charter of the current DetNet working group, but this part of work is not totally out of the sight of DetNet, because in DetNet architecture, there is a section about the controller plan corresponding to the aggregation of the control and manage plans in RFC 7426. And also in the DetNet data plan draft, we can see in the previous presentations that there are a lot of controller plan considerations included in the current draft. So we are not, in this work, we are not zero. We have something. But the purpose of this draft is that we want to summarize all these efforts about DetNet controller plan and also the requirement in one place. And we want to provide an overview of the possible solutions for DetNet control plan, especially the architecture. It can be a distributed system with signaling protocol. It can be a fully centralized control plan with a controller SDN system, or it can be a hybrid control plan, a signaling protocol and also have a controller. They work together. This also aligns with the work in HOE. The draft QCC is also have the similar structure of these three classes. And also we want to discuss some control plan issues that are unique to DetNet. For example, we have to build up explicit paths with resource reservation, or we have to build up explicit paths with PREOF. And we have also some discussions about DetNet's integration with the existing control plans. For example, the MPLS IP or SR segment routing things. So, and also Greg have some very great work about this part. The management plan issues unique to DetNet should also be considered. So what is the next? Actually, we are not sure because DetNet working group is not currently chartered to work on the control plan now. We just do the work about the architecture, the data plan, and the information model, the data data model, YAM model. So we are wondering whether the controller plan solution is also needed in the working group, and whether the working group is going to re-chatter about this part of work to make these discussions happen in the working group. And so we, of course, the comments, review, or questions are welcome. And also we want some feedback from the working group, what should be done next. Okay, that's all.
So I just looked at the charter again to make sure that what I was going to say is right. And I think it is. And I'll also look to Deborah, our AD, to respond to this, maybe not right now, but afterwards, after she takes a look at the charter again and thinks about it. But as I read the charter, we are certainly not chartered to do control plane solutions.
Yes.
We are chartered to do the management and control architecture and make sure that we have the right information, that we identify the information needed at the management and control plane. So part of the document, I think, is in scope. There's another part that is not in scope. So going and identifying the possibilities and the possible solutions, the possible ways, distributed or centralized, possible ways of controlling DetNet. I read our charter as allowing that in terms of even identifying gaps in control plane solutions. I think is within our charter, at least as I read it, and I'm making sure our AD is listening so she can she can tell me I'm wrong. Now, if we get to the point of saying we've identified this and here's our solution, I think we've gone too far. What we would need to do is go to the right working groups and talk to those groups about the solutions. So in terms of talking about the solution space, the architecture for control, that's certainly there. Talking about what specific technologies are available, I think we're on safe ground, and you're doing that. So I think most of this document we're in good, in okay place to have that discussion. There are definitely places where you're saying, let's solve it this way. That's too far.
Okay.
So,
I got it.
So Stuart, so I'm a bit worried that we've got carts leading horses here, because if we need to do a control plane solution, which I think we do need a mechanism. It needs to be in someone's charter to do it. We shouldn't stall this whole program.
We have 3 or 4 working groups who have a charter of doing control plane in the routing area. So I think we can probably ask them, say, you own this protocol, we see a gap, do you want to fill it? And certainly if they come back and say no, I think we have a really strong reason to go to the ISG and say we should change our charter to allow us to do it.
Okay, but I do think we somehow or other need to get past that reasonably soon. And the original reason for not doing control plane work is because we wanted to get the data plane. Well, I reckon we got the data plane in as good a shape as we can, and it would be really useful to start early work on this other stuff so that we are, because it takes some time and you need to think your way through it.
And I think most of what the document is doing today actually is really helpful in that discussion.
We should get the structural and administrative reasons for not doing control plane out of it.
To be clear, it's the specification of the control plane solutions. Everything up to that point, which is like 98% of this document, we can do here. It's really the point that says, I think there was like 2 sections that got into solutions.
All right, as long as we've got a path to seamlessly go on to control plane somewhere.
So one of the interesting things that happened earlier this week in TEAS is there was a proposal for doing traffic engineering for IP flows. And I asked about bringing in, supporting the DetNet IP flow, and the authors were receptive. So we may actually end up with a solution that we can use before we've even talked about the framework for it. So
Lou Anderson, a quick comment. So given the situation where we have a good document, what Lou has there printed out, it's 98% correct.
I said in
It's
scope.
98% correct in scope. It's scope is 98% correct. It's not. It's more to do to the document, but it's a good document. The problem I have here is when Lou says we should go to those other working groups. What is it the DetNet working group shares that actually going to take that initiative or not?
If we get to, when we get to the point of identifying shortcomings and we start talking about solutions, it's at that point I think we need to coordinate with the AD and the other chairs about how to go forward. We're not quite there yet. If now we're at the point where people are bringing in contributions of control plane solution documents, we can have the discussion in specific rather than abstract. By the way, Andy Malice had one comment in response to, I think, what I was talking about earlier with the charter. His feeling was he was being conservative in the reading of the charter, where since control plane solutions were not there, I guess he was reading it as we couldn't even talk about control plane, which, just to be clear, you start out and talk about the second line of the charter. It says the work encompasses the data plane OAM, time synchronization, management, control, and security aspects, referring of DetNet. So control, management and control is what we've called the controller plane. So, from the architecture level, from the high level, that is certainly in scope.
So I'm still a little bit concerned that you're actually pushing it way too out. I see the two sections that you pointed out that were going too far. They are an indication that this is already happening now. So we should be proactive and take that decision, take that action now to start discussing within the working group that we actually need to be involved.
I think the next step is to get some proposals on the table. Rather than talk in theoreticals, let's see the documents and figure out where they belong. So if someone has a control plane solution they've been holding back on, bring it forward, and then we'll figure out where it goes.
Bring it here.
Contribute it somewhere. Bring it into the IETF, and if it's in the wrong working group, we'll get it into the right working group. As you said, let's not hold up on process. Let's get the documents submitted.
So Erickson, I'm going to point out the elephant that we're all dancing around. Lou's already kind of hinted at it. We could possibly have this work already beginning to start in the TS working group. That's Lou talking to Lou. So, I mean, really, this is not as complicated as we seem to be trying to make it.
Yeah. So, we have a document on the table that is titled Framework, not Solution. So, it's a framework document on the controller plane. I'd like to gauge the feeling of the working group on whether the working group should be spending time on the architecture and framework level discussions of the controller plane. So again, this is something that's in scope of our charter. Do we want to spend time on it? Who's interested in doing that? I'm not even going to look down to see if Jabber, if Andy's hand is up. I'm sure it is. So should we be working on the topic of controller plane? It's a similar number to the previous one and a similar comment. There's some number there, but frankly, it's smaller than I expected. But that's okay. So there's some. Who thinks we should not be spending any time on this topic? No one. Okay, so that's useful information. So I think for this document, it would be good to carve out anything that is solution specifics. And if you have some solutions that you think are necessary, write them up and submit them separately. But let's continue talking about the document in the working group.
Okay. But in my personal opinion, I think if we just have a line about what to do and what not to do, perhaps it will be very clear. Because for example, in this document, we can point out which which section is not in the current charter. For
Don't
example-
worry about charter. Worry
Okay.
worry about the technology.
Okay.
In this document, feel free to talk about what is missing.
Mhm.
Don't put solutions in this document.
Okay.
Do put
Okay.
solution, if you have a solution to bring, put it in another document,
Okay.
contribute it to one of the working groups that you think is appropriate, and the chairs will figure out where it goes, and between the AD will figure out where it goes. The biggest thing is contribute it. Bring it to the table. Let's get the discussions going.
So what is the point or purpose of the current draft? Perhaps it's just kind of the requirement for the net control plan. Is that the right direction?
What you're asking me the purpose of your document, so it's a little.
Actually, I'm a little confused because without the detailed discussions about the specific solution, maybe in the left part is the requirement, right?
So we've had other documents in other work groups. I've even written some which go through and say, here's the set of things we need from the control plane, and here's what's missing. So it almost becomes a gap analysis document. Those are
Okay.
very useful documents.
Okay.
So there's nothing, and you're doing that. You're talking about what the options are and where the gaps are.
Mhm.
That helps guide the work that gets done. So that's
Okay.
useful.
It's reasonable for me. Okay. Any other comments? Okay.
And I do note that our AD did not get up and shout at us. So this is a good result. Thank you. So, Leon.
I'm Liang from China Mobile and one of the author of the ring topology draft. And today I'm going to present as the author and with the update from last IETF meeting. So the update in this 404 version mainly is the alignment of this draft with the architecture draft. So basically we use the terms that are defined in DetNet architecture. And it also support the packet reorder function and use the defined F label, S label, service label, and the control world in DetNet architecture. The presentation will be very short because I'm going to only talk about the updates. So the first one is in the single ring situation, where you have a point to multi-point DetNet service. The document basically show in the ingress and egress a node of the ring what type of function in terms of the replication, elimination, and reordering is needed. So for this particular example, in the ingress node, which is A in here, you will need to support the node will need to support the replication function, and for the leaf node in C, D, and F, in this particular case, the node needs to support replication and elimination and reordering if needed. This is basically the idea. So for the egress node, you basically read out the service, read out the forwarding label to determine whether this is the route, this is the packet you need to pop out, and then the node basically read the service label to distinguish which service, which DetNet service it is, and then to decide whether it needs to be reordered according to the control word. And in a more complicated situation where you have interconnected rings, and in this particular case you have two interconnected nodes. To put it in short, in this diagram, basically the upper node in the interconnected area will deal with the clockwise road, and the bottom one will deal with the counterclockwise node. So to be more in detail, the I1 node, when it receive the packet from B, it will basically forward it to PEF, the elimination function, and the eliminate function will read out the packet and then replicate it again to the ring on the right-hand side on the clockwise on the clockwise road. And then if the I2 received a packet either from clockwise or counterclockwise on the left-hand side ring, it will basically replicate the, well, eliminate the packet first, and then replicate the packet on the ring on the right-hand side on the counterclockwise road. And the other mechanism are all the same for single ring, for the packet on the ring either on the left-hand side or ring on the right-hand side ring. Yep. So summary. The ring topology is very important for long-haul transmission. Basically, we're going to see these type of ring topology very frequently in the network for long-haul. So we think it is very important for DetNet for people to understand and to know how we should configure the ring topology for DetNet services. And basically, ring topology intrinsically give you the protection with clockwise and counterclockwise route at the same time, and it's more efficient because it's only 2 copies of the packets to be sent, and to guarantee your performance. And we think after last meeting's discussion and the revised version in these couple of months effort, we think this document is in a pretty good status. So we would like to call for a working group adoption for this document. Thank you. That's all from me.
I have a question for clarification. So what makes it so specific in the sense that we now have the MPLS data plane that describes in generic, I mean the DetNet MPLS data plane in generic PREOF and control word and everything, and we have a number of solutions for ring topologies. A lot of work is going on currently as well. So I mean, is it a kind of an information or description on how to combine these into a solution, or?
Well, to be honest, these draft only describe specifically how you handle ring topology in a MPLS a data plane. That's probably the answer.
Have you looked at the other MPLS ring solutions?
You mean in MPLS working group?
In the IETF?
Yes.
Okay. And you don't think they apply? You don't think we can build on them?
Well, it's the principle are the same, but it's really a guideline where when you introduce DetNet services, you basically introduce the replication and elimination and reordering functions, which are not characteristics of native MPLS.
So we have 2 layers, right? We have the forwarding layer and the service layer, and the PREOF lives at the service layer. Have you looked at taking advantage of the existing MPLS ring solutions at the forwarding layer?
Have we what?
Looked at using the existing ring solutions as solutions at the forwarding layer?
Right, that's a good question.
So,
Yeah, I
Lou
think-
Anderson, if I read this correctly, and I haven't read the previous version of the draft, I haven't read the new one, but I think this is RMR for the forwarding layer, and then you need to add the replication and elimination and reordering for the service layer. So you shouldn't specify anything new for the forwarding layer. You should use RMR as it is.
Kiriti Kompala. I know nothing about DHCP. So you always do. I have two questions. One is, I haven't read the draft, but how do you determine clockwise and anti-clockwise? Is that something that's configured, or do you auto-discover that?
So how do I decide clockwise or anti-clockwise?
Yeah. I mean, every node has to have the same notion. Otherwise, you'll have a packet going this way from A to B, and then if B thinks that clockwise is back to A. So there's not, how do you get every node on the ring to have the same idea of what is clockwise and what is counterclockwise?
I'm not quite sure, but I might need to take this to offline discussion, but in my point of view, you basically set up your SP.
So you configure.
Yeah, you configure it beforehand.
Okay. So one of the advantages of RMR, to Lou's point, is it does this, by advertising stuff into ISIS or OSPF, and it determines this automatically versus needing any configuration. The other thing is, in this two-ring case, you said the upper node and the lower node, which makes sense, but you need to do this in terms of, in this case, the upper node is I1 if you're going clockwise, and if you're going counterclockwise, it's I2. You need to have this either be algorithmically done, or again, you're going to use configuration. The whole thing about rings is, if you're going to have lots of rings, making sure that you configure all the rings correctly can be a big problem. So the more you can make the rings do this either algorithmically or by discovery or something, the better you are in terms of making this a scalable solution from a management point of view.
Right.
Oh, and one last thing is, are cords, for example, in some rings you have this thing called an optical bypass. So physically you're still in a ring, but you might have a link from, say, E to G. Is that of any interest in DetNet, or does that not matter? Or do you know optical bypass?
Yeah.
So I guess it's a question
It's a question for the authors.
Yeah.
The authors are the ones
Yes.
bringing it
Yeah,
up,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not the group.
Right. I can't answer that right now, but I'll take it offline and have discussions.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the general comment is take a look at RMR and see if you can build on top of it.
Hi, Jung from Entry. There are many ring protection mechanism for various transport network technologies, including MPLS, RMR. On those, for those ring protection mechanisms, we cannot avoid traffic disruption in case of network failure. But with this DetNet ring, DetNet ring technology here, we can in the event of network failure, we can avoid traffic disruption. That we cannot, we don't lose any packet. So that's the advantage of this document.
Yes, but that feature comes the DetNet. So the DetNet service provision, the PREOF, that's the feature that provides you that. So it's, as it has been pointed out, we have two layers. There's the forwarding. Now you want to use ring topologies for the forwarding layer, potentially with existing ring technologies. And as for the PREOF, I wanted to also mention that what you can find is we called it the ladder topology, which is comprised of rings. And there were in 802.1cb, that example is explained in detail where to place replication, elimination points, and so on, and how to leverage that fact, the artifact of that topology. So it's a combination of the service and the forwarding layer.
Right, exactly. I mean, I heard a question about how you kind of use a conventional ring protection mechanism with this DetNet technology. I mean, the DetNet ring protection. My answer is that when you use this DetNet type of protection mechanism, you disable that conventional protection mechanism in forwarding plane. Not forwarding plane, forwarding,
You said it right.
Sub-layer, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Okay, that's the one. And this draft, I mean, I know that the existing DetNet framework and architecture documents describe that ladder case, including, this ring. Ring with two interconnected nodes can be seen as ladder type, ladder topology network. Yeah, I know that. But here is that this draft, this document describes how you apply DetNet technology to the ring topology in details.
Yeah.
I mean that the current architecture and framework documents description we thought are not enough.
Yeah, I think you're suggesting that there's a room for a PREOF an optimized PREOF aware ring protection scheme. And that may be the case. I think you need to articulate it a little bit better, and in particular, if talk about how you want to take advantage of RMR or why you think you can't take advantage of RMR. I think that's a good discussion to have, because we've worked it's a technology we worked on. We want to make sure that if we can leverage it, we can, and if we can't, and it makes sense to do a PREOF aware ring solution, well, we can go a little bit deeper on that. One of the things that, of course, will come up is how to make that scalable. Yeah.
So, a question for clarification. What do you mean by scalable?
I didn't hear the last word.
What do you mean by scalable?
Where that your ring protection scheme is where at each ring, you don't have to have the same number of PREOF functions as you have end to end. If there's a way to do that, if there's some way to do some shared protection. If your only solution, if your solution is that at basically every ring becomes a segment, and you do PREOF within that segment for every flow, that's going to be a very expensive solution. So maybe there's an opportunity to do something better.
Okay.
Through aggregation is what we typically look at.
I cannot catch it right away, but I can ask you for later.
Absolutely.
On. And about the first one, we certainly can add a description on how that this can cooperate with RMR or any conventional ring protection switching mechanisms.
Okay, great.
We can certainly do that.
I guess my Kiriti compiler, my comment is the way that they're using this in the ring, since you're multicasting on both paths, you're not doing protection really. What you're saying is if a link fails, you'll still get the packet because I'm going the other way around. But RMR has two parts to it. One is the self-configuring of rings, and the other is protection. I think you don't need the protection part here, but you do need the self-configuring to make it scalable from a management point of view.
Lou Anderson. I got up here because I thought Lou was a little bit vague when he said, go take a look at the RMR. Well, yes, but you came back and said that they actually have to show that they can't use RMR. But I think that's the case. We need to look at RMR and see if there is a synergy here. And if we can use it, we should use it.
In general, we try not, I mean, I know some groups don't follow this, but in general, we try not to have two solutions for exactly the same problem. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying anything more than let's follow our standard practice of if there's an existing solution that is usable, let's use it.
Okay, Chung Dong-yu again. About self auto configuration. I mean, here the example is for P2MP multicast services, and the branch node or the node attached to each leaf is aware of that. I mean that I have a subscriber, so that can. In my understanding, that is done by any multicast protocol, multicast configuration protocol, and then maybe that once subscriber is attached, then the DetNet can get the information. I mean, a signal, and then enable packet replication functionality. That can be done automatically.
Well, we look forward to seeing the update based on the discussion. I think we've had some good discussion and some good interest in
I
this.
think it's fair that we should have looked the RMI solution, but we also think that the value of this draft is really to give a guideline of how you integrate the service layer consideration of DetNet to the ring topology as well.
Yeah, and we look forward to seeing the update and wherever you end up based on your exploration of the RMR. And, what you can use, what you can't use.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we're actually over time. We managed to use all our time, even though we had hoped we'd have some additional conversation on SRv6 and bounded latency requirements. If you have comments on those, please take them to the list and continue the discussion there. Thank you very much. And we will see you online and then in Singapore. And we're missing one blue sheet.